Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's always very hard to do a post-lunch session, but I have full faith and confidence in my panelists here this afternoon. They're known to stir things up, and I hope that that's exactly what you're going to do, Mr. Goyal and Ajay Banga. We have an interesting topic for discussion here, and we're talking about the future of digitization in India. And I know that post-November 8th, digitization has become synonymous with demonetization, but I would hope that that's not going to be the case going forward, because I do believe that digitization does have a role to play as we continue to grow as an economy and as we continue to grow as an inclusive economy. So we do want to focus on what the road ahead will be, what we can see in terms of collaboration between the private sector as well as the government. And really, when we talk about this idea of moving to a less cash society, what does that actually mean for a country like ours? What does it mean for an economy like ours? Let me start by quoting to you what the Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam said in the Economic Survey. And I think that really sets the context in a lot of ways for the discussion that we will have this afternoon. Arvind Subramaniam in the Economic Survey said, digitization is not a panacea, nor is all cash all bad. Public policy must balance benefits and costs of both forms of payments. The transition to digitization must be gradual. It must take full account of the digitally deprived, respect rather than dictate choice, and be inclusive and controlled. There are several thoughts there that Mr. Subramaniam has put on the table, but let me start by asking you, Minister Goyal, and I don't want to go into whether demonetization was good or bad, but if I could ask you to elaborate for us what the lessons have been from the experience post the 8th of November.
Well, I think one very clear, one can call it an outcome, one can also call it a learning, has been that over the last few years, and I've been looking at the numbers, this happened particularly after 2005 or 6. The country just kept printing more and more currency. And we actually almost encouraged cash transactions rather than banking transactions or digital transactions. So you saw a huge amount of increase in the percentage of cash to the GDP in the 10 years before 2016. Now that's not good for any economy for 2 or 3 reasons. One is it adds to cost. It's an unnecessary cost. B, the traceability of funds becomes very opaque. And most importantly, the safety and security of money. After all, a poor person in a village doesn't have very great security in his home. And should he keep his savings in a safe or in a cupboard in his home, it's very possible that he may lose that or it may get stolen. So the country over a period of time had become too used to cash. I think the good big thing that happened was the country is now seriously moving gradually to a digital economy. In terms of other learnings, I think traceability of cash, so just allowing banks to give any amount of cash to any and everybody who wants to withdraw it may not always necessarily be good. It also causes economy moving from a formal economy to an informal economy. So I think some amount of check and balance on where the money is going, what's happening with large amounts of currency is good. The Prime Minister yesterday spoke about how the cash to GDP ratio has improved from 12 to 9 in a growing economy, which means the currency has significantly reduced in the system. To my mind, digitalization is inevitable. It's happening the world over. India has the opportunity to take a lead in that. Just like we are now leading in many areas, be it climate change, be it renewable energy, be it telecom. I think we have an opportunity to lead the world in digitization. And that's one big outcome that I expect happening out of demonetization.
Before I come to you, Ajay Banga, if I could, Mr. Goyal, just follow up on the point that you made, and you're right, because the RBI in its annual report has said that currency in circulation has come down to 8.8% versus 12.2%. This is the number as of the end of March, and we're now comparable not just to some other emerging market economies like Thailand, etc., but also some developed markets like France and Germany. So when you talk about India leading the way, so to speak, when it comes to digitalization. If I could only ask you about this specific parameter, cash in circulation, do you believe that this is the zone that you find comfort in, or do you believe that we need to do much more to, in fact, bring down further the cash in circulation?
Well, I think it will be a natural phenomena. Even after the demonetization initial rush, government per se hasn't done anything to make people move towards digital transactions. It's happened naturally as more and more people are recognizing that it pays to be honest, it pays to move into the formal economy and not be a part of the informal economy. As transactions are becoming cheaper on the digital medium, as smartphones are increasing, we already have 300 odd million smartphones in India, slated to double by 2020. Now, smartphones have become your bank, your wallet, all of that in one. And for example, post 8 November 2016, I don't remember spending cash except at the temple. And I don't know how much time more before my temple also starts putting up a avenue to pay by card. Internationally, I've paid by card at temples in London or in Wembley. So it's not as if it's something very, very difficult to imagine.
Yeah.
And I actually don't recall paying cash for anything other than my temple donations in the last almost a year now.
Okay. Well, temple donations via Paytm or UPI or the Bhim app or whatever, maybe that's the future.
I'll go for SBI wallet.
You're going for the SBI wallet. Any particular reason why you're going for the
SBI wallet? I have an
wallet?
SBI wallet on my phone.
Okay. Well, Ajay Banga, let me come to you now. And, as Piyush Goyal pointed out, we have seen an uptick in digital transactions. In fact, UPI transactions, the volumes are up tenfold since December, 30.8 million in September, up 8.5% from the previous month. If I could ask you about one particular aspect which often doesn't get talked about, and I think SBI, and since Mr. Goyal talked about SBI has done some analysis on that banks today suffer about 3,800 crore rupees of losses to run the current payment infrastructure system. So what are the lessons as we move forward to ensure that we have the infrastructure system in place, and also that banks don't actually have to bear the burden of this? What is it that we need to do?
I'm not familiar with that number, so it's a little bit of a surprise to me. It's so large.
It's an SBI report.
Yeah, I don't know enough about
Sure.
that. So but I'll tell you, there's a bigger topic there. The first thing is I want to cover on one thing that Piyush mentioned. The cash to GDP angle. In the world, 85% of retail transactions, people buying merchandise, are still in cash, 85%. In India, that number is 90+%. It's reduced because of some of the activity of the last 4, 5 months, 6 months, but it's still a very high percentage. Having said that, in the US, it's 50%. In Germany, it's 80%. In Japan, it's 80%. So this is not an emerging market, developed country thing. It's something to do with infrastructure, culture, history, a lot of the things that Piyush touched on when he started off. That is a guiding post for us to think about. The only countries in the world where cash is lower than digital card, I count card as digital, right? Because I don't care whether it's a card or a phone or a fingerprint. Sure. It's all digital, it's non-cash. The only countries in the world where cash is smaller are Korea, South Korea, and the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
And the reason those two countries are in that situation is because of very enlightened government policies, with a lot of education of consumers. A lot of the things that I think this government is beginning to do are all in the same direction. That's the first thing. The second thing is...
So if I may interrupt you, just to get a little more detail and color on what you talked about from a policy perspective, what is it that you would like to see from a policy perspective to encourage the creation of this ecosystem?
I'll tell you, I believe a lot of things are happening. The first one is I think GST will make a huge impact because of the fact that there's no longer an incentive for a merchant to take a cash payment from a customer and cannot provide a discount because of tax avoidance. The whole system changes when you introduce this and when it goes through the supply chain, all the way from the manufacturer to the end point where the consumer buys. The second thing is, it's really important to provide the right incentives in the system for merchants to accept electronic payments. So what Korea did, as an example, is they said, if you take electronic payments at a greater percentage than X in your number, our tax guys will come and audit you once in 2 years. If you don't, we'll be there every 3 months.
Is that something that you might want to consider?
Just for your
Don't go there. I'm just giving you an example.
Ajay, I'm happy that it got raised. When post-demonetization, we were looking at all the digital modes of payment and seeing how we can encourage. That's when Ajay and his team and I had a lot of interactions. We actually studied the South Korea model. My office has studied...
Interaction, meaning 24 hours a day, this guy was interacting with us, including on the phone with me. I'd get off a plane and I'd get a call from Piyush saying, I need you to do the following.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. But we
Interaction
learned
is
a
a
lot
polite
from the
word.
South Korea model. And that's the advantage of having a government which is willing to, which has an open mind. We are not necessarily saying that we have to reinvent the wheel on everything.
Sure.
So, for example, in our tax policy, Finance Minister Mr. Jaitley brought in this clause that when you have a turnover up to, I think, 2 crore rupees, if the amount you transact digitally, the presumptive taxation rates are much lower, significantly lower. Instead of 8%, they take only 6% as profit. Now, we are, in our own way, trying to encourage digital payments. My sense is that all of these various initiative steps will help us move the needle very rapidly.
He's on the right path. This is absolutely correct.
I'll tell you 1 or 2 small things. The railways used to charge a service charge. Post-demonetization, they removed that service charge. And we saw digital transactions really shoot up. Now, the only charge that is charged is a MDR, merchant discount rate. I'm actually now engaged with bankers to see what we can do about that MDR also. Ideally, I would like the amount a person has to pay, whether digital or cash, to be the same. And this talk about the State Bank incurring 3,800...
Not State Bank. It's a report put out by State Bank
about
because
the banking.
banks have, yes.
Now,
And
I'll give you another perspective, Shereen. You understand banking. I've been on the board of 2 banks. I remember in the board, we used to agitate about ATM costs, the cost per transaction on the ATMs. And now I'm talking, and I'm becoming older by the day, I'm talking at least 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we used to calculate that cost per ATM transaction at about 45 rupees. Probably today it would be in the region of 60 or 70 rupees. Even with technological upgradation, let's say even 50 rupees. Now, what sense does it have that a person goes to an ATM, withdraws cash and then spends? And the banks are all the time filling in the ATMs with more cash. Go to the next level, that everybody has their debit cards, and instead of withdrawing cash, has the ability wherever he goes, in a train, in a bus, in a grocery store, in a movie hall, buying popcorn, anything. As the ecosystem grows, bankers will be saving tons and tons of money, far more than 3,000, 2,800 or whatever figure this report has attempted to suggest. Far more than that, if they promote digital transactions. And with technology, look at the Bheem app. It's made it so simple to transact digitally that I personally don't think a transaction will cost positively anything more than half a rupee or a rupee. It could be $100 million transaction, it would happen for 1 rupee. Because ultimately, the value doesn't change the nature of the transaction.
So the only part Piyush and I have had this conversation is I believe that the merchant discount rate has a role to play. And let me explain that.
I was hoping that you were going to come up with that.
No,
Yes.
we've got to make people wake up after lunch. So he and I have had this discussion. And here's my view. My view is, again, balanced in this. An excessive merchant discount rate is a really bad idea because it disincents the merchant from ensuring
So
that
what would be an acceptable merchant discount
There
rate?
is no such, it depends on the country. I'll tell you why. What's behind a merchant discount rate? The payment infrastructure. If you think cash is free, it's not. Just because the merchant is not paying for the cash directly, they're paying for it in many different ways. From cash pilferage to the cost of going to deposit it, to managing it.
Yeah.
And by the way, the government is paying a huge amount of money on cash management. There are independent studies available around the world that printing, securing, and distributing cash costs the central government of a country between 0.75 and 1.5% of GDP. Okay, that's not a small number.
No, it's not.
Now, at no point do I think that should go to zero.
Yeah.
Because I'm kind of in Arvind's shoes. I think cash has a role to play, but not at 95% of an economy. If it was 25% of the economy, we would be having a different discussion, because the amount of money saved by the government on that printing, securing, and distributing cash could be put to outstanding uses that he's probably got 30 ideas in his fertile mind, right? That's my point. So therefore, the question really is zero the right number for an MDR when cash is not zero? It's just the question of who's paying it. And that to me is not chalk and cheese. It's a real comparison.
Has he been able to convince you? I know that you've been engaging on this issue, but has he been able to convince you so far? Because
we have agreed to disagree.
This is a real challenge.
Let's look at it differently.
Yeah.
There he goes.
Now, let's understand. I'll give you my own personal experience. Once upon a time, it's a very old example that I'm sharing with you. And it's an example which actually will reflect to all of us the Indian thinking. We are a very conservative society. We are conscious about waste. Every rupee we calculate when we are spending. So if in a particular shop, you get tomatoes at 20 rupees a kilo and another one at 22, the lady of the house is going to be attracted towards the 20 rupees store. It's not as if those 2 rupees is going to make any difference to Mr. Rahul Bajaj. But he'll certainly, as a good conscientious person, want to save that 2 rupees, I think, which is how they make the billions in their company. That's intrinsically Indian.
Yes. Well, it's intrinsically
human.
business.
It's
It's
actually
intrinsically
human.
business as well, anywhere you go,
Now, in this situation, I had gone to somebody had passed away. I was sitting there and we thought there should be some bhajans being played. So I went to buy a small radio or a VCR in those days. Remember there used to be VCR with those cassettes?
Yes.
I went to buy one of those to play bhajans. At that, it was an
a tape
unfortunate
recorder,
moment.
you mean?
I still remember it.
A tape recorder, you mean?
Tape recorder or something. Now the guy said it'll cost you 1,000 rupees if you pay cash and 1,020 if you pay by your card. I had actually taken out my card because middle of the night, you suddenly go. You're not even carrying cash and all that. Now,
Piyush?
I was psyched out.
Piyush, the $20 is not because of MDR.
No,
that's because on the $1,000 he wouldn't be paying taxes.
Possibly, I don't know.
And that's my point.
That we are taking care of by formalization of the economy.
So I think you'll find a change.
So I'm just trying to reflect you. Card or cash, $20. And I actually was very unhappy about that. I still recall, and imagine remembering something which happened 20 years ago today at the WEF means it must have struck a chord somewhere.
Yes, clearly it has.
So let me
pay $20 more just to pay by card to buy a tape recorder. So I suspect that if the bankers, it's largely the bankers who are at the back of the MDR, right? The bankers will have to reorient their business models. They'll have to reorient how they're going to make digital transactions free and use that database to make money out of alternates.
So digital transactions have to be free. That's very clearly and unequivocally the message that's coming here from Piyush Goyal.
I would just tell you this. While India is doing great stuff on digitization, I've studied this now in 100 countries around the world. And all I'm requesting you to think through is the logic of this conversation. I think that if you disincent players to provide the latest, best, and most secure systems and ask them to make it back by using data, you might actually be creating an animal that we have to solve for 5 years down the road, as compared to a relevant MDR of a lower level. What do I mean by that? Today's debit card MDR in this country, for all of us, whether it's RuPay or us or Visa, is actually at one of the lowest in the world. It's at 0.25% for most transactions, 0.5% for others. For the railways and for government payments, it's as low as 0.25. Honestly, the merchant and their saving of the whole system of the cash management, I could prove to you through 1,000 studies done by third parties that the cost is much higher than that. So my point of view is I actually understand Piyush's issue on the tape recorder jazz because I used to face it too. I would go to buy turbans in Lajpat Nagar market. And the guy would say, sir, 550 रुपए अगर आप कैश देंगे, नहीं तो ऐसा करना 600 रुपए चाहिए कार्ड में. And I said, यार ये 50 रुपए for an extra turban, logic क्या है? And he said, tax देने पड़ते हैं. So I feel like there's two conversations going on here.
Yeah.
The right way to get at this is the Wattle Committee actually has created a really thoughtful, I was saying this to someone yesterday, that committee report, Piyush, is world class. And in fact, forget about India, we should be using that as an example of Indian care in developing the right system. That one will tell you as well that there is a need for an economic incentive in the place. And I think data is an interesting economic incentive. I'd just be careful of relying only on that.
On that, okay.
Because
No, I'll give you a simple example. I now have to look after the railway story. So IRCTC passes that merchant discount rate to the consumer.
Yeah,
I've been at them that you have to eliminate it. But railways has its own challenges. They need funds and they cannot increase their tariffs very easily. So in this conundrum, I'm going to be talking to bankers. Look, you have the railways account. You have accounts of all my coal companies. You're getting business from me. So you have to take a call on the business that you're getting, on the cross sales that you can do. I'll allow them to sell insurance policies on my website. I'll give them an economic incentive to work with me.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong at all.
Just remember all this.
Yeah.
In all this,
And I hope all the bankers are listening because this is coming next in the next 2-3 days.
This is coming next in the next 2-3 days. All right. So
he's good. He's good with this. I will tell you one thing. Just know I don't make anything from the MDR. I'm arguing this case based on my experience of countries. The MDR goes to the banking system.
Sure.
So I'm still arguing this.
I'll allow them to sell their cards, credit cards through my system.
Yeah, there you go.
There
If
you
they
go.
waive
There you go.
Okay, I'm going to hold him to that.
I'm going to leave the two of you to sort that out once the session is over. But let me come to you on.
We have fun like this.
I can see that, and we'll continue to have fun. But let me ask you about the issue of regulation. And I remember when Kenneth Rogoff was here in July, and we spoke with him about demonetization and the lessons from demonetization. He was very clear that he doesn't believe in going cashless, but what he did seem to suggest is that you should have regulation to bring down the use of cash. Now, we've seen several recommendations, whether it's the SIT saying that there should be a cap on withdrawals and so on and so forth. From an idea or a vision as far as regulating the use of cash is concerned, what
We have no
further
plans.
can we see?
We have no plans to really focus on regulation as much as on persuasion. And my own sense is that is what works well with the people and will give us faster and better results. I don't think we need to regulate that. I think what we need to do is only incentivize, like we did with the income tax for digital transactions, B2B. Going forward, the government is looking at different ways to encourage people to transact digitally. For example, I mean, one thought I can throw to all of you in the audience and through you to all the viewers, can we not, all of us, in whatever work we are doing, insist on a bill? Now, it's a small thing, but I remember I used to go to, I love seeing Hindi movies. It's my stress buster.
Which one have you seen off late?
I just saw one half a movie, actually.
He has no stress right now, so he doesn't.
I saw a movie for 40 minutes. That's the time I had, so I saw it for 40 minutes. But the important point is when I used to buy popcorn there, right? And that's the fun of seeing a movie in a theater. Every time I realized that the guy would skim me of $100. So, and usually when you're going to an Inox, you don't count the change, and probably it's fashionable not to count the change, unfortunately. I'm a little old-fashioned. I generally look at the thing. As I'm ordering, I know what's the bill going to be, and I check the cash. So on 3 or 4 occasions, I found in Mumbai that I was being fleeced of $100. And I would raise the issue and he would say, oh, sorry, galti ho gayi. So I raised it with the owners. They said, we've taken action, we've changed the contractor, blah, blah. Again, it happened with me. It was unfortunate. Probably the young person there may have thought this is an easy way to make money. Then they started bringing in, if you don't get the bill, the purchase is free. Like you have it at the airports.
Sure.
Right? And it made a world of difference. I've never had to have that kind of a problem again. Now, if we as a country insist on a bill for whatever we purchase. And if this message goes down the line, we'll move towards a formal economy and then nobody will hesitate to pay by card.
By the way, that's the reason why cash is not free.
Yeah.
The
One of the
100 bucks is
reasons,
being
exactly.
taken.
Yeah.
So that's my point, that actually Piyush is a really interesting thing. You go to a lot of stores overseas, they will write this there at the cash register saying, if you don't get a bill, it's on us.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is managing the cost of pilferage and managing the cost of avoiding of paying is kind of what he's referring to.
So, Mr. Goyal, you said that more regulation is clearly not on the government's agenda at this point in time. You would like to use persuasion to get people to move to digital transactions. Let me also then ask you about what the future is as far as high denomination notes are concerned. And there was confusion post demonetization that, we brought in an actually a 2,000 rupee note, but, the government explained it saying that this is what was needed to tide over the demonetization.
Very logical
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
It was stupid if anybody didn't understand the basic logic of it.
We understood the logic of that then, but I'm saying now, what is the thinking as far as high denomination notes are concerned?
I don't know. That's something which is well beyond my pay grade. But I'm sure not too many people
Let me ask you for your point of view personally, sir.
I don't think many people here are carrying too many high denomination notes these days. That's passé. We all use digital means to transact. More and more of the country is using digital means. Now tell me one thing, this story about high denomination notes. How many occasions are there in any of our lives where we need to pay 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 rupees to somebody? It's a very rare thing. It's maybe in a five-star hotel like where we are that we may need to settle a bill if, Rahul Bhai has had a big Marwadi thali which is too expensive for somebody else, that you may need to pay a large amount of money, right? But, or if Mr. Godrej has had some nice, delicious prawns, maybe. But otherwise, where do we spend large amounts of money in any case? So there's no need to really have very large amounts of cash or wads of cash in our pocket.
Yeah, no.
And again, both Adi and Rahul would pay with a Mastercard, I can assure you.
Go ahead. Keep plugging.
I can promise you if we look into their wallets, they'll also have Visa and an American Express.
Let me tell you something. My competitors have words that are four-letter words. Visa and Amex are both four-letter words. You got to remember that you got to have a brand that's more than a four-letter word.
That's still you've done a Pele pass on me. You haven't answered the question on high denomination notes. But let me talk to you about collaboration, Ajay. And you've just signed an MOU with the state government of Andhra Pradesh today. The Chief Minister was here. Give me a sense of when we talk about collaboration, realistically on the ground, what is your ask? What is your expectation, whether it's the centre or the state?
So I actually think that what we've done in specific with Chandrababu Naidu is we've signed a collaboration on 4 areas, one of which somebody was referring to in our opening panel on farmer tools. So we're, with the Gates Foundation in our lab in Kenya, we had developed a very simple tool which allows farmers to engage with the marketplace without going through middlemen. They therefore get paid directly without the middleman. They can also get access to fertilizer, seed, cropping patterns, and so on. We're going to adapt that to Indian users, build it in a lab in India, and roll it out in Chandrababu Naidu's state as a starting point.
Okay.
But my ambition is through people like him to reach the central government and look at similar ways of being constructively helpful.
No, this sounds very interesting.
It is
I'd love to know more.
I'll that's one. I was just talking to Piyush about other apps when we were walking in, so he knows where my mind is going. The second one is we're going to try and create a cybersecurity conference which will bring together not just people from our company, but ethical hackers, security experts from overseas, and create a level of understanding and awareness to be raised on that issue here. My fear is with us going digital in India at the speed that he and his colleagues are doing, we need to be very conscious.
You've preempted my question, and I was going to ask you that, and I'll get Ajay to comment on it as well. And while we debate the issue around Aadhaar and so on and so forth, I'm not getting into the privacy issue as much as I'm getting into the data protection issue and the need for a robust regulatory framework, given the strides that we're making in this space. How conscious is the government of this, and how soon can we actually expect meaningful action on this front?
Extremely conscious of it. In fact, I think the UIDAI has been very, very focused on this. Mr. Nandan Nilekani himself has told me that right through the development of the Aadhaar
Yeah.
framework, they've been conscious about this. And it's not as if, after the Pentagon gets hacked, you can't just keep picking on the Aadhaar.
No. The idea is not here to pick on the Aadhaar. As I said, I'm not getting into that issue at all. But I'm saying that there is a need for a robust regulatory framework in the country as we move towards more digitization.
But I think that's an evolutionary process. It keeps evolving. And as Ajay will, I think, agree, that you can keep adding firewalls and safety features, and there'll always be somebody who will be one step ahead of you. So it's a continuous race.
Shane, he's right.
Race to the bottom, possibly.
I agree with him. I think this is a constant process. I actually think the Aadhaar idea was brilliant in its conception and in its execution. My belief is that as you go forward, as you go and implement digital identities, you've got to find a way to adapt this idea in such a way that, for example, let's assume I knew 7 things that Piyush does. Like watching a movie when he's stressed or stuff of that type. And I could pull those 7 things together using data that cannot by itself be useful to identify Piyush. But putting all 7 things together, I could unlock it and say, oh, this is Piyush Goyal. He's paying for his popcorn with this card, a Mastercard. Please do allow it to go through. When you do that, you cause what I call using Aadhaar and biometrics and the way it was built in the best possible way. By the way, that's for today. 3 years from today, this idea will become obsolete. So I feel this is a continuously evolving space. That's why I want to do the kind of conference I'm talking about. I want people like him to say, this is a topic of today which we need to pay attention to. We're doing a third thing with Chandrababu Naidu, which you'll find really interesting, which Piyush will find interesting. I haven't had a chance to tell him about this. We're going to collaborate with a couple of universities to help co-innovate ideas where we and the universities together will come up with new innovations that can be launched in India and then used elsewhere as well. To me, that is a path-breaking and cool thing to do. And I want to push it as hard as I can.
You know, I know one of the cool things that you've done is to bet on India, even though it's only about 3% of your revenues currently, 14% of your employees.
It's the future.
Yeah, and that's why I said it's a cool...
Plus, I'm too scared of not doing it because he'll beat me up.
He'll
call me every day when I land.
ये मत बोलो, राहुल भाई सोचेंगे ये सच है.
So in the context of everything that you've just told us, Ajay, and you know, your investors clearly believe in the vision that you have for India. But how long before you actually start to make money in India?
No, to tell the truth, I view a lot of things that I do in countries like India, as well as in the financial inclusion space, I view it as mission critical for our company. And the reason is I'm in the business of killing cash. And killing cash, you have markets where cash utilization is lower, where digital penetrations are higher. I can grow faster there. These are markets which will make money. Maybe my successor will make even more money out of these markets. It doesn't matter. Companies like ours have been around for 50 years. We want to be around for another 50. And my investors, my board, and I are completely committed and devoted to that idea.
Since you're in the business of killing cash, and I'm going to digress from India for just a bit and pick up on that comment. You know, you talked about the Scandinavian example, and a lot of Scandinavian countries are actually now thinking about the possibility of a digital currency. You know, we've got the Bitcoin. Jamie Dimon says Bitcoin is a fraud. You know, your thoughts on that?
I think Bitcoin is junk. So I could not agree with Jamie more, but I love the blockchain technology. So don't mix up the two things. I think the blockchain, we were discussing it a little earlier, blockchain could be really interesting. We're going to be doing proofs of provenance for diamonds with blockchain. So you can track a diamond from its mining into its actual going to Brussels or Antwerp, coming to Gujarat for milling and changing, and being bought by one of us in a different country. Art, diamonds, pharmaceuticals. The blockchain is an unbelievable opportunity. I think it needs to be allowed to develop with some guide rails. Otherwise, it can go into areas that don't make sense. So that's a different topic.
So why do you think Bitcoin is junk?
Because I think of that as being a currency that cannot be, anonymization of currencies is not something I'm in favor of. One of the reasons why I believe cash is expensive, by the way, is not just because it costs money for a central government to print it, but every single cross-border illegal activity in the world is facilitated by cash. If you think that terrorists take money out on a credit card, you're wrong. if you believe that drug goes from one country to another on the basis of a wire transfer, you're wrong. It is cash. And to me, cash is a social cost that people who are enlightened in government are tackling. And I'm the most supportive on that topic. Because my children are growing up in this world. I don't want the scrouge in our system. I just don't.
No, get that point that you make. But Mr. Goyal, since we're talking about digitization, let me also bring in the aspect of inclusion now. And whether it's through Aadhaar, it's through the JAM Trinity, the effort on the part of the government is to try and get more of the unbanked within the banking system, or at least, you know, access to some kind of finance and credit. What next now in that endeavor? What next in that effort?
Well, first of all, I must acknowledge the contribution of all the bankers of India. I remember it was at Davos in 2015 when the World Bank president actually asked me to convey to Prime Minister Modi his compliments that in a short span of 4 months, India was able to do something which the World Bank has targeted 2030 as the terminal date.
Actually, we were hosting that meeting together, remember?
I remember that. At breakfast.
Breakout.
Breakfast.
Yeah.
And the Netherlands Queen. And
correct.
All that, right.
Queen Maxima was there.
And at that session, he said that, frankly, now we need to rethink even our sustainable development goals. That do we need 2030 to really expand to the rest of the world also? Same thing we are doing on electricity. How can we ensure access to electricity to every Indian citizen in the next 15 or 18 months? We don't have to wait till 2030. Do we need to keep the children of tomorrow deprived for another 10 years? Similarly, when it comes to financial inclusion, look at the dramatic impact it has had on the way people get government support, affirmative action. The direct benefit transfer, it's almost saved $10 billion already. And that's money that goes in for social welfare causes. It's not as if that money is frittered away, giving somebody a coal block without charging him for it, or telecom spectrum without charging money for it. In this government, every rupee gets used to serve the poorest of the poor. Similarly, look at the fact that mudra loans. We have now nearly 90 million mudra loans, amounting to about $50 billion. So more than that, 60 billion now. 60 billion US dollars given out to small entrepreneurs, making them job creators rather than job seekers, helping them stand up in life, becoming self-reliant. Look at the way we've been able to connect financial inclusion and Manrega. Manrega, where there was, all of us knew there was a lot of leakage. Now we can actually, with the JAM Trinity, identify the person through his Aadhaar number. There's his bank account into which the payment is made directly. All middlemen are out. In fact, post-demonetization, one of the set of people who most vociferously opposed were the middlemen or the leaders who used to skim a note out of the payment being made to casual labor or to labor in the Assam tea gardens. They were very unhappy because if money is going to go directly to the bank, then they lose their commission or their ability to skim money out. What he said, the illegal transactions.
Sure. Cost of cash.
Cost of cash. So I think the next steps are going to be, we now have a bank account in every home. We should move that to a bank account for every individual. The connecting of the Aadhaar number with the bank account. Going forward, connecting that bank account with GST and tax. So that more and more people have free flow of information. The ability of that account and the transaction history helping us to give loans to people in their homes.
Credit
literally
and
credit and insurance. That's right. Through the financial inclusion program. So then it's a multifarious benefit that will just keep multiplying. And there are endless possibilities. I mean, you can keep discussing this till the evening and we won't be through. With what other benefits? You can give discount schemes. You can help people get connected with technology. It's endless.
I want to pick up on a comment that you just made when you talked about the DBT and the savings that the government has accrued on account of DBT, and you said that that money is not frittered away. I want to ask you, sir, about the coal cess, and this I ask you as the coal minister.
Yes.
The coal cess is now being used to compensate state governments for the loss of revenue on account of the GST. For a country like India, where in a state like Delhi, we're struggling to be able to breathe clean air, should realistically the coal cess have not been used to do something about improving the air that we breathe, etc., as opposed to sending that money towards compensating states for possible revenue loss?
Absolutely right, Shereen. That is where this coal cess started. It was a clean environment cess to promote renewable energy. But thanks to the honest government that this country finally has, we have been able to procure solar power at 1/3 the price that the previous government used to buy it. We have been able to bring down...
wait.
One minute, let me finish.
Sure.
We have been able to bring down wind power costs to 1/3 of what was being paid 4 years ago. And only this morning at 4 o'clock, only the second wind auction brought down wind power to 2 rupees 65 paisa. We've been able to bring down LED prices, which the Prime Minister alluded to yesterday, from 310 rupees for a 7-watt bulb to 40 rupees for a 9-watt bulb.
Right.
Now, all of this is savings, is honesty in action, right? And that is why now we don't need that coal cess to promote renewable energy by itself. It is below grid parity. So I think it's available resource which is being put to good use to help GST rollout. After all, in GST rollout, we're all familiar. States were very concerned. What happens if the producing states lose out on revenue and the consuming states get an unfair advantage? So this was an issue because of which the previous government could not bring GST. States did not trust that government. They had not even paid the CST dues. You remember the central sales tax dues? It was Mr. Jetli who provided 12,000 crores, brought in confidence. So Vishwasniyata, I often talk about trust. That missing trust factor in government, Mr. Jetli and Mr. Modi brought back. And thanks to that, GST is happening. Now this money is not required for renewable energy. We are using it to another use, to introduce a common tax, make India one market. So I think it's a great use to that money. And I'm delighted that we are probably the only nation in the world which is taxing carbon. Even the United States of America does not tax carbon. It encourages more and more use of carbon and pollutes the world and the atmosphere. In fact, just for information, the United States of America consumes more coal per capita.
That's good.
150 years ago than what India consumes today. And as of now, they consume 8 times the amount of coal that India consumes in 2016-17. So that's the sensitivity and concern. Of course, there are many other things one can speak about, but it is countries like India and leaders like Mr. Modi who are truly passionate about climate change. So I can assure you what this government is doing to address this problem of pollution. I don't think any government in the past, in India certainly, and most governments in the world have taken as many proactive measures as we have done in the last 3.5 years.
Okay.
He's as passionate about this as I am about MDR. You can see that.
Yes, I can clearly see that. So before I get the audience to pitch in with their questions, Ajay,
I have one point
Please.
on financial inclusion.
Yes.
Or two, actually. One is I think there's a real need to move the conversation from inclusion to inclusive growth. I think Piyush means that instinctively, but I believe words matter. And what do I mean by that? Inclusion is like helping people get out of poverty by connecting. Inclusive growth is the next generation of thinking. I think India is at the stage where it can start talking like that. When you do that, companies like ours and others will see that doing well and doing good are not anti-colonial.
Mutually exclusive, yes.
And I feel that's a really important discussion for all of us to have. Outside of all the joke. Look, we are friends, we can joke, but I mean this with all seriousness. This is a really important topic. The second thing is, in the 7-8 years that I've been discussing this now as the CEO here, my company's market value has multiplied from 20 billion to 150 billion. In doing all this, I've put money into reaching 360 million people around the world to get them into inclusion by giving them a method to access their identity and their social benefits through either a card or a phone. It's a phone in Egypt, it's a card in Nigeria and South Africa, and it's different instruments in Mexico.
Yeah.
My belief is that if a company like ours with partners could do it, and if there are 2 billion people in the world without formal inclusion, if we can get to 360 in 5-6 years, shame on the rest of us if we can't get to the 2 billion in another 10 years' time. So when Piyush talks about Jim Kim saying to him that you should congratulate India on what it's doing, I think we are on the beginning of comprehending how powerful this idea can be. Done the right way, built the right way, with the idea of economic incentives in the right place, and with one very important thing, which actually I credit Piyush for, which is to build out acceptance in merchants at the last point. We've partnered with the Confederation of All India Traders to reach as many merchants as we can, to educate them with a standardized QR code model, which he pushed us to build, and get standardized in the industry, and then get that QR code model rolled out across the world, not just in India.
Sure.
That, I think that doesn't get talked about enough. So.
Well, we just
QR
did Bharat QR. You're absolutely right. We've got 10 minutes to go before we close this session. So anybody here with questions, if you could raise your hands, please, we will get to you. Yes, Sandeep, go ahead.
Where are you? Oh, yeah.
Hi. I'm Sandeep Parekh from FinSec Law Advisors, and I wanted to talk of regulation. 6 months back, we had a major breach of banks.
In the mic.
Yes. So I want to talk of regulations, and I think 6 or 8 months back, we had a major breach of banks where a lot of banks and even money was stolen. So I just want to highlight, you mentioned that we don't need more regulations. I think we've had Western countries which cap liabilities of individuals when there is bank fraud. So I can give you my example where I use credit cards a lot. I don't use debit cards at all because I'm scared of my bank getting wiped out and then me fighting with the bank for the next 20 years. So maybe if I can have each of your comments on, some kind of regulation which caps liability of consumers.
That's not a regulation. That's more in the nature of an insurance. You're basically providing an insurance, and one can always do that. I think in India also we have some period in which if at all your credit card or debit card is lost, you are secure, you're protected from any losses.
In fact, one of the most interesting things about using a card anywhere in the world versus doing direct access to your bank account is that if your card ever gets hacked into and you call your bank, your charges get reversed and you get a new card. It's inconvenient, but you're safe. And I've always said that for a long time. So I'm not familiar with your specific circumstance in India, but if I can talk to you later, I'll see and understand better.
I actually just saved some money like that. Somebody had put in $4,500 of transactions on my credit card. And in all parts of the world, some hotel bills, hotel rooms were booked. And fortunately, and we didn't get any
must have been
SMS
a card
alert.
made by one of my competitors.
I can check it right now. And I got a full reversal of $4,500 right away.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's all right.
More questions, yes.
So could it have been yours now?
Let me just try and get a microphone across to you.
No,
Thank you.
He's going to check.
I'm Snake, Global Shaper from Ahmedabad. You just mentioned, Mr. Goyal, that government is saving a lot of money by reducing a lot of prices across different pricing. So what is it that government is going to do by collecting this lot of money into the accounts of government through, let's say, GST, you paying proactive taxes, through demonetization, you are getting all the cash in the bank accounts. You mentioned crude oil, I guess, which is not transferred to us because we're still paying 70 plus rupees per liter of petrol. So what is it that government is going to do with a lot of money in their accounts?
I'm delighted you've asked this question. No, I'm very, very happy because this is something, again, I think, quite passionate about. During the rollout of GST, I went around the country. I used to meet business persons, traders. And it was in Visakhapatnam, I think, that a person got up from the audience and he asked me, what is the incentive for me to pay taxes? In some sense, the bottom line of your question is that. And I said to him, That's exactly what I'm explaining. So ultimately, tax is money coming into different governments. Largely, it goes to the state government. Center gets its share. So what's the incentive for the person? Because you are feeling that you are being burdened with that tax, right? You have to pay. You just said crude oil, for example. Now, we have all boarded the train, if I can take a punt on the new ministry that I'm handing. But we still have millions who haven't boarded the train. You know, those 40 million families who don't have power, their children are just like you and me. We got an opportunity, we got education, we got a good deal in life. That child over there, does he not have a right to electricity? Does he not have a desire to have opportunity for quality healthcare, quality education? Should not every government be concerned about taking an LPG cylinder into the homes of every family in this country so that the woman in that house cooking there does not inhale 400 cigarettes of smoke? Or would you rather that a person in Odisha has to carry a patient on his shoulders for miles altogether to reach the nearest doctor or hospital? Now, certainly, one can argue that there's a lot to be desired, a lot of improvements. But ultimately, it's going to happen when all of us pitch in. It's the 125 crore Indians that you're working for, but it's the 10 crore privileged Indians who will all have to pitch in to make those 125 crores get a better deal of life. So I think whenever you're paying your tax, just keep in mind that if you're going to evade that tax, or if you're not happy about paying that tax, there's somebody out there who doesn't have access to internet. There's somebody whose child there probably is barefoot. There's somebody out there whose aged mother is not able to get quality healthcare. There's still maybe 200 million women in India who can't afford sanitary pads. That's the story of India. Now, we all are pitching in to change that narrative. We are all working to see how we can use some of this money. As I said earlier, we are not squandering away coal blocks to anybody free of charge. We are running an auction process which will bring the states $50 billion in the years to come, which will go to serve the poorest of the poor. We are not giving away spectrum to friends and family and members of parliament of the government so that they can profit here. We are not buying LED bulbs at 310 rupees so that some people in between make huge profits. Or people remain deprived of $6.5 billion worth of saving every year because they cannot afford LEDs at 500, 600 rupees. We are rather making it available for 10 rupees a month paid in installments for 5, 6, 7 months so that they can save far more than that every month in their electricity bills. So I think this is a government which is putting every single rupee that is collected in tax to fairly good use, to serve the poor of India. We believe in what Pandit Dindayal Upadhyay had said, that the first right of a nation's resources are for the poorest of the poor, the person at the bottom of the pyramid. And I think if that is not incentive enough to pay your taxes right, then certainly I have no better argument than that.
Piyush, I pay 50% in New York from federal, state, and city taxes. And I have never disputed the idea because my belief is by paying those taxes, my children and I are living in an outstanding place with a future where an accident of birth should not determine your success. Because you and I are accidents of birth. We could have been born elsewhere. So he said this really well.
And I hope that it's not going to be 10 crores that will have to bear the burden of, and I hope that we do see...
Don't
we do
take
see
it literally, it's just...
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We have just about time for one final question. So, yes, sir, go ahead, right in the front.
It's actually 50%.
Thank you very much. My name is Abhishek Agrawal from Axion, and you touched upon on the digital inclusion, financial inclusion. My question is to you, Mr. Goyal, in terms of what are we doing as a government to promote now the digital literacy, the financial literacy, specifically for the rural segment where this is now rolling forward, and what efforts are we putting on the financial institution to really make this as compulsory as they roll it out? Thank you.
Excellent question. Though on the second part, I personally don't believe in anything being made compulsory. My basic belief is that persuasion gives you far better results than compulsion on anything. I mean, when I was sent to moral science classes in school, it was not a compulsion. You could go to church, you could go to the moral science class, you could go be a NCC cadet or whatever. You could go to a social science class. I chose to go to that moral science class, and I'm happy I did it. In fact, I sometimes regret why schools in India no more have that, at least one lecture in a week, trying to inculcate some value system, some ethics in our youngsters. So digital literacy or financial inclusion also, in a way, is something which will be more persuasion. We have about 230,000 common service centers run by the Ministry of IT under Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad, which is working towards taking financial literacy and educating the people in rural India particularly about different modes of transacting digitally, about banking, benefits of banking. So different wings of the government are doing that. But I promise you, nobody can do it better than all of you. Because ultimately, government has processes, government has its own limitations. But what the private sector can do, what each one of the youngsters, after all of us, suppose you were to go in on a Saturday evening in a train to one of the rural areas of India and train children in a village, maybe wherever you come from, wouldn't that be great? They would learn it far better from you than from a typical government servant. So I think if everybody, that's what Prime Minister says, Jan Bhagidari, if everybody takes it upon himself or herself, that I have a role to be the change, as that young girl this morning said, Malvika, that if each one of us decides that I will be the change that I want to see in the other, I will make a difference to my country's future. This country is, there's no limit, it's boundless goodness in this country that we have.
And I think that is the perfect note to end this conversation on. There is consensus between Minister Goyal and Ajay Banga on a lot of the ideas that have been put on the table to try and ensure that India gathers more momentum on its path to digitalization, with the exception of MDR. I think that is going to be a battle that the
economic incentives.
Of the two of them will have.
There's no disagreement at all. There should be a fair MDR and reasonable cost to it.
Correct.
But it's not necessary that the consumer or the merchant needs to bear that cost.
Yes.
There are a million ways to make that, recover that money in a more efficient, more smart way.
Well, and my suggestion would be to get these two gentlemen back post-lunch next year as well to stir things up once again. Thank you very much, Piyush Goyal, Ajay Banga, for joining us here this afternoon.
Thank you.